Hello everyone, welcome to this session on React Interview Questions. Today in this session, we will be talking about React, which is one of the most important front-end technologies when you talk about web development. So today in this session, we will be talking about some of the most important interview questions which can be asked you while you apply for your next interview, right? So let's get started. But before we move on, guys, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Intellipaat channel and also click on that bell icon to never miss out on any updates from us. So now let's go ahead and get started with the agenda. Alright guys, so first we will talk about some DOM related questions and then we will move on and talk about the architecture of React. Once we're done with the architecture of React, we'll move on and talk about some questions on Redux and then we'll talk about event types in Redux, some questions on that. Alright guys, after that we'll move on and talk about the stateful components in React, and once we're done with that we'll talk about binding in React. Once we're done with that, finally we'll be talking about prop types and then we'll end the session. So guys, this is the agenda for this interview questions. I hope it's clear to you. Now let's move on and start with the first topic in the interview question, which is related to DOM.
So let's begin this ReactJS interview questions with one of the very important questions that is mostly asked in all of these interviews. So to begin with, we have the question which states differentiate between virtual DOM and real DOM. So DOM, as you already might know it, is the document object model. And there is a specific working with respect to React on virtual DOM and the usage of real DOM as well. So more on that in the next couple of questions. But then the answer for this question, the way you're supposed to approach this is very simple. Just give them the concise difference between the virtual DOM and the real DOM. For example, when you consider working with virtual DOM, it is actually a little bit easier in terms of usability rather than real DOM. And then there's a lot of memory wastage which happens whenever you work with JavaScript objects. And here, when you're making use of virtual DOM, memory is not wasted as much as it would in the case of real DOM as well. And then when we talk about the JavaScript XML elements, which is also called as the JSX elements, it will only be updated every time if an element actually exists for it. But then in the real DOM, that's not actually the case. In real DOM, what happens is every time there's a new element that gets updated, right, a new DOM itself is created for it, and then an object is processed and later passed on to JavaScript and then the browser and all of that. So in terms of the backend working efficiency as well, a virtual DOM has a bit of the higher picture here. And then when you talk about the ability for either the virtual DOM or the real DOM to manipulate HTML directly, well, here real DOM might have an advantage because it has the ability to directly manipulate HTML while virtual DOM cannot manipulate HTML directly. And then when you think about compilation and the actual updates being shown, virtual DOM will update faster than the real DOM, and you will understand why in the next couple of questions, as we'll be dealing with virtual DOM a bit later. This brings us to question number 2. Question number 2 states, what is React? Well, React is one of the world's most popular JavaScript library as of now. It was originally launched in 2011. It was created by the developers at Facebook, and it was mostly meant to provide a nice pipeline for very good front-end development, right? So creating front-end elements is not only complex, but at the end of the day, it has to be simplified to a point where you can efficiently work with the tool. Well, React was this particular implementation. It is based on a component based approach where you try to build each components and make sure that the reusability of these components are very high, in a way where you can take these components out and make a lot of things with a lot less, if I have to put it in a very simple way. So React gained a lot of traction since 2011, and no doubt it is one of the number one JavaScript libraries out there. And for this reason, you can develop a lot of complex stuff, be it mobile interfaces, web applications, or even designing anything complex, right? So with React, it makes it all very simple. So when you're asked this question, make sure you mention all of these to add a little bit of value to your answer, rather than just saying that React is a JavaScript library, right? So saying it out this way will add value to your candidature. Now, coming to question number 3, it says, what is the meaning of virtual DOM? As we just discussed in the first question, so to give you more clarity about this, a virtual DOM is nothing but a simple JavaScript object. So a virtual object is an exact copy of a real DOM, where it can be considered as a tree, and it can be considered as a node tree which has all these things such as elements, it has attributes, it has properties attached, and much more. So if you picture a node tree right now where each of these branches can branch out into elements and their attributes and the properties, that is what the virtual DOM would look like. And then when you think about React uses something called as the render function, where it actually creates a tree, it updates the tree based on the changes that happen in real time, with respect to the data model, and then present the changes that you have done out to the browser, right? So it is very similar to this, and virtual DOM is in fact used for that as well. And then when you think about all the changes, either performed by the users, or if there is an action which has led to a cause, which changes something, then again the render function is called, the virtual DOM is put into use, the object is used, and then the working of it goes on in an order, as we'll check out in the next couple of questions. Coming to question number 4, it states, what are some of the important features of React? This question can be answered in many ways because React has so many different features that you can talk about. You can go on 10 minutes with the answer for this particular questions. But then the most simple way I would suggest is to, pick out features that'll help you portray the uniqueness of React, right? So I have 3 points on your screen that you can use to add a lot of value. The first thing is, it says React makes use of a single directional data flow model. Again, this is only native to React while its development was, and it is in a league of its own. The single directional data flow model works very effectively. It's very rapid, and it is used to just make the entire process of designing and developing a front-end solution very efficient. And then when we talk about the ability for the front-end development language to have control over server side of things, well, yes, React has the ability to completely control the server side data processing abilities, the handling of it, and then merging it in terms of creating a pipeline where you'll be using it for your front-end requirement as well. And of course, we spoke about virtual DOMs. So React uses virtual DOMs, and this in its own stages has multiple advantages as well. So you can name 3 or 4 points which makes React very unique in a way where your answer is concise and you keep it precise at the same time. Now this brings us to question number 5, which states, what is the meaning of JSX? JSX, as I just previously told you, is the abbreviation for JavaScript XML. So it's nothing but a very simple file which is used in React to make sure that you hold together this essence of JavaScript and React in a way where there's a lot of advantages of using these together. So, when you think about working with HTML and JavaScript, a JSX file is basically used to bring out the HTML file, make sure you have the ability to make use of the HTML syntax in a very simple way. And at the end of the day, of course, yes, the syntax is, very readable in a way where you can understand a lot of things even without having to know what it does exactly. And with this comes efficient programming and, of course, good performance to the application. If you have to take a look at an XML file, JavaScript XML file, there's a quick sample on your screen right now. There's a render function we're returning where we're printing the h1 header to be hello Intellipaat learners, right? So this is a very simple XML file, the JavaScript XML file, and in most of the cases it is as readable as this. Even though there's only 3 or 4 lines, even with more lines, a JSX file is very much readable, and you can very much contemplate and understand what's going on there as well. Now with this, we come to question number 6. Question number 6 states, can browsers read a JSX file? The answer you have to begin with very simply is no. Directly, browsers cannot have access and read JSX files, right? So what basically happens is, whenever there's a browser which needs some changes to be portrayed to the screen and it has to be rendered by the JavaScript programming languages, the browser can only read an object, and this object is directly provided by JavaScript. Now, the case comes in a way where if you answer no, then how do you make a browser read a JavaScript file? It will be the follow-up question you will be asked if you say no. So to explain that aspect of it as well, to make a browser actually read a JSX file, it has to be first converted into a JavaScript object using something called as JSX transformers, and only after using JSX transformers can they actually be shown to the browser, and the browser making sense of it as a JavaScript object, and then it'll work further down the pipeline. So unless your browser sees the JavaScript object, it cannot understand JSX files directly, guys. So with this, we come to question number 7. Question number 7 states, why is React so widely used today, right? So from 2011, from the developers of Facebook, it has been seen a lot of traction, and a lot of people are jumping on React, not only for its ability to create very good environments, working environments, easy ability to work with other frameworks or whatever it is. It has created a plethora of job openings, in fact, and that is one of the reasons why everyone wants to get on the React train, because they know this is one of the top development frameworks out there, right? So if you make use of it and if you want to build a career in it, it could be very lucrative at the same time. Now, coming to some of the features of why React is actually widely used, you have to understand that testing is a very, very important part about development frameworks, right? So here as well, with React, making use of testing methodologies for your user interface becomes extremely easy. And the another important thing is that React can talk very easily and work very well with other frameworks such as Angular, Vue.js, and much more. And coming to point number 3, we're talking about readability of code from that time, right? So the ability of you to understand the code as soon as you look at it is very, very high, which makes sure that you can have an easy understanding of what's going on with the code and help you work in an effective way as well. And now when you talk about how React is being used for both front-end and server-side requirements, where it has the ability to, plan, maintain, hold some data and then work with it, well, here is the biggest advantages of why React is being considered today. And at the end of it, of course, with all of these applications comes very good performance, and with all these features, it brings about a sense of efficiency which no other framework has seen before. So this is one of the reasons why React is considered to be as popular as it is today. Now, coming to question number 8, this is a common question as well. This question has a very high probability of being asked. If you keep on talking about the advantages of React, the interviewer can ask you about any disadvantages with respect to React as well. No matter the amount of advantages, even though they outweigh the amount of disadvantages directly, there are some limitations when you talk about React. So, since we're making use of JavaScript XML here and something called as inline template formatting, what happens is that whenever you're writing code, it tends to become a bit complicated at times. And, especially for beginners, it'll be very difficult for you guys, even though the syntax might be very readable. But then this syntax is complex on its own to understand its structure as well. So, with respect to that, understanding methodologies, JSX and everything, beginners can find it a little tough, to work with these as well. And then we're talking about React. React contains a huge repository of information where you have to learn a lot before implementing. And of course, your implementations are going to be very powerful. But then to get there, you really need to have a lot of knowledge and information, right? So that can get a little overwhelming as well. And then we're only talking about learnability. But then when you really have to concentrate about the simplicity of React, yes, it is simple. And this poses as a disadvantage because it is not a complete framework. So you will have to have certain dependencies along with React. And of course, if you have to use them together, it means that you have to learn whatever it is required of the dependency and learn React at the same time as well. Even though it sounded like an advantage at the first half, now you get the clear picture of what some of these disadvantages of React are. This brings us to question number 9, which is a very simple question. It says differentiate between Angular and React. Well, both of them are amazing frameworks, right? So when we talk about Angular was actually developed by Google while React was created by Facebook. The usage of DOM, Angular uses the real DOM and React makes use of the virtual DOM. And then when we're talking about rendering, rendering happens on the client side with respect to Angular and on the server side when we talk about React. The architecture is again a very simple one. Angular provides support for model view controller. The complete MVC support is provided, while React only provides the view aspect of the model view controller. So when you have to talk about data binding, Angular takes a bit of a sidestep here because it only supports unidirectional data binding, while React has the ability to completely support and champion two-way data binding as well. So you really don't have to explain a lot when you're asked about Angular and React, because at the end of the day, these two frameworks are meant for their own niche uses, and both of them are really good at what they do. So just make sure you highlight the basic differences, the actual differences that lie in between between them, and that should be more than enough to get you on to the next question. And the next question states, what is the meaning of the component-based architecture of React? So one very important thing about React you have to understand is that every single entity is considered to be a component, and these components are like the foundations which are used for building user interfaces for web applications. So when you have a component based system, what happens is that every single entity will become completely reusable in a way where so you can move it around, replace it, and once it has the ability to become independent of each other, right? So this is when you are extremely efficient while programming itself, and your application becomes efficient in a way where it can reuse the components rather than having like 10 components in the place of one, which would again cause very high redundancy, which is not good for programming and which is not good for execution as well. And then when you think about rendering the applications with a component based architecture, the rendering becomes very easy and it does not depend on any other components of the same user interface as well. So when you think about it, again, it's completely a huge advantage for React, and it is only because of the component based architecture. So with this, we can move on to question number 11. Question number 11 states, how does rendering work in React? Rendering is a very, very important aspect of React, as you might already know it, as every single component that exists in React, if it has to be seen by the user or by the browser, it has to be rendered. And rendering in React can be done by using a function of the same name, which is the render function. So what actually happens is whenever there's a function that is called, right? So after it is called, it returns an element that actually represents a DOM component. And what happens here is that if you're wondering, can we, have more than one HTML element at a time to be rendered to make sure that it is efficient? Well, yes, it is possible to render more than one HTML element. And how is this done? This is done by taking all the HTML tags, enclosing these tags, and then passing it all to the render function one by one to make sure that they execute concurrently as well. So rendering is a very important aspect, and this is why. So coming to the 12th question, it states, what are the states in React? So states is something which is very important you have to understand about React as well, because it is one of these vital things, because it is the source of data, or it can be considered as the objects which control various aspects such as component behavior, component rendering, and much more. So states, as the name suggests itself, is used to easily create these interactive components that we like in all React applications, and of course to create the dynamic applications as well. So as a serving foundation, states is very vital in the working of React. With this, we can come to question number 13, which states, what are the props? So what are the meaning of props in React? Well, props are actually a short name given for properties in React. So whenever there's properties we talk about in React, all of these are read-only components which are completely immutable in nature. So they cannot be changed as and when you require in real time, right? So whenever there's an application, what actually happens is that, there are properties which have an order that is passed down to them from, let's say, the parent components to the child components, and then these properties are matched to each other and then used. But then if you're wondering, can we have child components which can assign properties to parent components? Well, no, that cannot be done. This is done only to make sure of the concept that we already discussed. It's called as the single directional data flow. So to keep the data flowing only in one direction, even in this case, to keep the data flowing from the parent components to the child components and the properties associated with them, props are very vital to be used in React as well. And then coming to the 14th question, it states, what is the use of an arrow function in React? So you might have used the arrow function, or you might know how to use the arrow function as well. So it is a very simple expression that is used in React in case if you have the requirement where you have to bind certain components manually. The functioning is very simple, it is very direct, and it is very helpful when you're working with something called as higher ordered functions as well. Again, we have another question for higher ordered functions as well, so we'll check that out there. But then coming to the usual example of where you have to manually bind components, you can see my input on change equal to this dot handle change and bind this is how you manually bind it, right? Now there's a fun way if you make use of the arrow function. So instead of directly saying it that way, all you can do is to enclose the function and use the arrow function, as you can see on your screen right here. So this arrow function is another way where you can use it. Here in this example, of course, the syntax is very simple, but But then if binding your components can get complex when you're using a large piece of code, this will simplify it to a very good extent. With this, we can come to question number 15. Question number 15 states, what is a higher order component, right? So as we just discussed in the previous question, higher order component is a component, yes, but then when we talk about it in general, it is actually a technique that is put in place for React, where, we make use of this entire architecture based on something which we already discussed, right? So it's the component reusability logic. So to apply all of these components, we have something called as the higher order components. And one thing that you should always mention while answering this question is that they are actually not a native part of the React API at all. And what actually happens here is that it will allow the users to reuse whatever piece of code that is required, have some bootstrap abstractions if required, and much more. And it's not only this. With higher order components, what happens is that it will allow for very, very simple sharing of any sort of behaviors between the components in the component structure. And then doing this again, we will circle back to one very important thing about React, is that it will give way for high efficiency and easy functioning of the applications. Well, with this, we can move on to the 16th question, which states, what is the meaning of create React app in React? Well, the create React app in React itself, it is actually nothing but a very simple CLI. A CLI is a command line interface where you can use it to create React applications where you have no build configuration. And using this is very simple in a way where all of the tools come predefined and pre-configured with the CLI. So doing this is mainly advantageous for you as a developer, because at the end of the day, you will be having the ability to concentrate more on the code, more on the logic, on the dependencies, rather than how you can work with syntax or the complexity of actually building the application and much more, right? So it's a simple CLI, and you can use the syntax shown on your screen to start a very simple project in React as well. It's called create React app space my app. My app is being the name of the simple project that you want to start. So with this, we can come to the next question that states, what are some of the advantages of using create React app in React? So we saw what it is, but then it has certain advantages which make it stand out as well. So, with Create React App, one very important thing is that it has the direct support for JavaScript XML, flow statements, and ES6 statements as well. So with this, what it will do is it will make sure that it is very simple for you to work with without worrying on a large piece of code that happens in the backend. And of course, it will provide you fast interactive testing components and line development servers, which are very, very, very vital when you're working with debugging as well. And you get direct scripts which have the ability to handle JSS, CSS, and any other file that's required as well. And then your CSS is already auto prefix, it is ready, it is built in, and you can use it thoroughly as well. So with these 5 or 6 points that you can mention for the advantages of using the Create React app, and then this will make sure that that you're proving to the interviewer that you do have a concrete understanding of the foundational concepts involved in React as well. Coming to the 18th question. In the 18th question states, what is the meaning of Redux? Redux is again a very important aspect of React in a way where Redux is actually used to store individual states of these applications. So every single application will have a state, and then to keep it very simple, we have to store it in a single entity, and using Redux we do just this. So if you're thinking about, is Redux a JavaScript object by now? The answer is yes. This entity that gets stored into the state of that holds the state of an application is actually a JavaScript object. So changing the states can be done whenever you're pushing out any actions from the applications, or whenever you are writing the corresponding objects for these particular actions, mapping them while you're modifying their states as well. So a simple Redux object is shown on your screen. First name is John, last name is Kelly, age is 25. So to retain this first name, last name, age in a state in a single entity, this is where the JavaScript object called Redux comes into the picture. So all of the data that gets retained by the Redux, so sometimes there is another name for it. The interviewer might ask for a store. So well, a Redux store, or it is just called as a store where the data is basically stored. Now with this we come to the 19th question, which states what is the difference between props and states. Props we already saw, it's as properties. States we already checked out as well. So there are certain simple differences that we can check out in the conditions. See, for example, the ability to perform any changes in child components. For the properties, yes, you can change it. With respect to states, you cannot change the child components. Now, can the parent components change values? In the case of props, yes, they can change it for their child components. In the case of states, no. So then what can states do in these conditions that we're talking about, right? So each individual component, can changes be done inside each individual component? So that is where when you ask that condition, of course with properties you cannot change, because then this defies the entire working architecture of properties and the component object model, right? So in the case of states, yes, changes can be made into the components, and this is one very simple yet elegant difference that you can put out when the interviewer asks you the difference between props and states. Now with this we come to the 20th question. The 20th question states what are the three phases that is involved in the component lifecycle of React. This is a very common question. This is among the first top 10 questions you will always be asked if you're going into a React interview, because it's very simple at the end of the day and it denotes your understanding of the concept. Because when we talk about the three phases of the component lifecycle, it involves initial rendering, updation, and the process of unmounting. With initial rendering, which is the first phase, this is where the entire process actually begins. The component goes to the DOM and all of that. And then when you talk about updations, this is where the component has the ability to be updated, the code to be changed, it has to be rendered again if required, and then it gets added onto the DOM. And the unmounting becomes the third important phase, where this involves the destruction of the component and its removal after it is not being used, after its rendering is done, and after it is no longer in the viewing base or the viewing platform of the user, right? So it has to be removed from the DOM to make sure the application is kept efficient as well. So first we render it, then we update it, and whatever gets updated and re-rendered gets into the DOM, and after which we have a component which we do not use, we remove it. It's pretty simple, guys. It's initial rendering, it's updation, and it's unmounting. So with this, we can check out the 21st question. So the 21st question states, what are events in React? Events are these important things, probably the most important things that happen in the entire React architecture, right? So think about this. Whenever you perform any action, right? So like moving a mouse on the user interface of the application, or let's say pressing a key on the keyboard as well. So what all of these actions pertain to is that they'll trigger something called as an event. An event will then do a certain set of steps. It will perform a certain set of activities in response to these triggers, right? So the triggers are the mouse pressings, the mouse movements, or the key presses on the keyboard. Now, to perform certain activities in response to this is a good example of what events are. And think about the DOM architecture, and then when you think about the working of the DOM architecture, handling an event in React is very, very much similar. It's very much similar to that of the DOM architecture as well. So with this, we can come to question number 22, which states how are events created in React. Now, it is always advantageous that you answer questions like these with a small snippet of code, right? So ask for a piece of paper, or in case if you have your laptop in front of you, just whip up a tiny piece of code where you can actually show how events are created in React as well. And they are created in a very simple way. First, you have the function where you'll have to put in the logic for the code, and then of course with the render function, the render functions, whatever is in the div that will be rendered, it will have and you have the functionality of the div as well. So on click this dot show click here, so the message click here will be displayed on it, and as soon as you click there, the code basically will go into the segment which is shown as code inside. So there you have to devise and work on the functionality of what response you should provide when a user would click on that button, for example. So with this, we can move on to question number 23. Question number 23 states, how is routing in React different from the conventional routing that takes place in other frameworks? It's very important that you understand the subtle differences that lie in between conventional routing and routing in React in two aspects. One, it's by using pages, where when you think about React, here every single page is actually a new file that gets moved around in conventional routing, in case if you used conventional routing, right? So but then in React this is not the case. Each view is not considered as a new file in an explanation where all of these files become one single HTML entity. So instead of having a new file with the conventional routing methodologies, here we have one single HTML entity that can deal with all of these. So that's with respect to pages. And then when you have to talk about navigation, right? So in the case of conventional routing, users will manually have to move across different web pages to probably view different things. And every time this is done, the view model is basically refreshed, right? So whenever you click on different pages, every time the website gets refreshed, the application gets refreshed. In the case of React, that is not the case. The view will remain the same. The view is not refreshed because of only one important thing, is that the objects are reissued here to create new views, and new objects are not created here, guys. So creation of new objects, updation of the DOM model will create a scenario where the page automatically refreshes when you click on the new website, but in the case of React that does not happen. So this is a very important difference between conventional routing and the routing that happens when you use React. Coming to question number 24, it states, what's the difference between Flux and Redux in React? Well, we're going to check out Flux and React both in detail, but then to answer this question in a very concise way, you can name about 4 or 5 points where, in case if you're talking about Flux, it contains the logic and the state of the applications in the same place, where when we're talking about Redux, that is not the case. The logic and the states are stored in separate places. And then when we talk about states, Flux has mutable state. It can be changed while updation in real time, while with respect to Redux, the states are immutable. And then when we talk about the number of stores, we spoke about stores a bit before. Flux has only one store and Redux has many stores. And then if you're talking about a dispatcher or a handler, Flux does have a dispatcher, while React does not come with dispatchers. And then of course components. Components are connected to Flux in React directly. And then when we talk about Redux, of course, since we're talking about Redux, the container components are directly connected, guys. So, when you think about the basic differences that exist between Flux and React, one is the presence of a dispatcher, the other one is the ability to have multiple stores, the data being mutable, the states being mutable more precisely, and then the separation in the storage of the states and the logic. So these 4-5 points are found to be the foundational differences between Flux and Redux in React. Let's come to question number 25. Question number 25 states, can AJAX be used with React? So the first thing you have to start out with your answer with when you have a question like this is either yes or no. And in this case, the answer is yes, because just like any AJAX library where you have jQuery AJAX, you have Axios, or any of these libraries, you can use this very easily with React. But to do this, you have to remember one very important thing, is that every single component has states, and you have to maintain the states here, because properties are again passed down to the parent, to the child components, and to make sure you maintain all these properties and that they are correct. And with React, you will lose the ability to move data in two directions, right? So it's unidirectional. So once the props are sent from the parents to the children, then there is no way to send the props back to the parents, right? So this is one thing which is an advantage in terms of workability, and of course in terms of rendering efficiency. It'll have a huge impact whenever we're working with dynamic data. So the answer is yes to this particular question. With this, we can move on to the 26th question that states, what is the meaning of synthetic events in React? We checked out what events are, but then what are synthetic events? What you have to understand about synthetic events are, yes, even they are objects, and the simple thing is that they act as cross-browser wrappers. So what this does is this will allow the users the ability to make use of any of the native events in React alongside this as well. So why is this done? Why do we even require cross-browser wrappers, right? So this is done only to increase compatibility. So by doing this, you can make sure that your API can run across a variety of browsers and that it does not become browser dependent. So if a piece of code or an application works well on, say, Google Chrome, but then if it fails to work on Safari, it really doesn't make sense, right? So to make sure that the ability of React has the outreach of multiple browsers, we use these synthetic events to do that for us in a very, very simple way. Now with this, we come to question number 27 that states, what are stateful components in React? Stateful component, as the name suggests, are entities which have the ability to store any changes that happens to them and hold it in a place of memory. Stateless components will not have any states because they will not have the ability to store the changes that happen or hold them in memory. But then stateful components, yes, they can store all the changes. So whatever change in state, it is stored along with other information, such as what are the changes that happened in the past. There will be a document for that. What are the current changes that are taking place while the document is being executed and active rendering is taking place, and of course there will be documentation of in case any future changes do occur as well. So stateful components play a very vital role in the working of React. And then this brings us to the 28th question. The 28th question states, what are refs in React? And again, as you might have already known, refs is actually a shorthand for references. So whenever we talk about any sort of references in React, they used to store the reference to either one single React element or store references to a React component. And what and why we do this is to only make sure that we can return it later using the render function to, let's say, if you have any good animations that you have to run, imperative animations that keep running either on a loop or any rapid animations. Then of course, so references are mainly used in case if you have third-party DOM libraries that you have to work with. And of course, one very important use of refs is to make sure you have the ability to manage focus and apply media playback to your web application or on your website for it to render as well. So mostly it is used in the case of media, animation, images and videos. But then one very important thing to mention is that it is also used to join third-party DOM libraries. Well, with this, we can move on to the 29th question that states, what are controlled components in React? We checked out what components are, stateful components are, but what are controlled components, right? So controlled components will always refer to the components that have the ability to maintain their state, same as stateful components. And here the data is actually controlled by a parent component. So this is a child component in the first person's perspective. And when we talk about this, the whatever value is present here is fetched only by making use of the props that it gets from its parent component. So why is this done? This is done only to make sure to quickly notify if there are any new changes that occurs when we're using callback functions while rendering. And this at the end of the day will simplify about 5 or 6 other steps that need to be done in case we do not make use of control components. It makes sure that the code is simple and effective to work with for you as a developer and React as a programming framework as well. Now, when we talk about the 30th question, one very important aspect that we have to cover in this particular interview questions segment is, why is a router required in React? Router is something which is very important, as you'll see, and this is a question which is again very, very important in a React interview. So when you think about routers, well, routers are extremely efficient components, when we talk about React, because when we add that onto our URL, the user is taken from one particular component, and it's basically like mapping out a route for the components. So once you have a component of framework where you can actually walk through each of these components in a particular order, in a particular route, well, this is why it's got the name router. And there's a simple piece of syntax on your screen right now that denotes the usage of the router library. And of course, since we're using router, the library has to be added in React, and of course it can be done using the syntax. So we have the root exact path, we're defining the path, the component is the home component, then we have another component, new post and post. And as you can see, we are routing it manually from home to new post to post, right? So the router is mainly required for this purpose. Now with this, we come to the 31st question. So the 31st question states, what are the components of Redux in React, right? So one very important thing that you have to keep in mind while answering this question is that Redux comes with 4 very important components. It's action, it's the reducer, it's store, and it's view. So action is an object that actually describes a call. Reducer will actually denote the state change that happens in the storage unit. Store, on the other hand, will denote the state and the object tree storage, while view displays the data that is provided by the store. So the features of the components go very hand in hand with their name. So an action will describe the call, the reducer will show the state change that happens in the storage unit, the store will denote the object tree storage and the states as well, and then the view will display the data provided. You have to remember the components, and in case if you do not know, just recall the names of it, and once you get the names, it is pretty easy to understand what it does and then convey the same to the interviewer as well. With this, we can come to the 32nd question that states, what are the advantages of making use of Redux? Well, there are numerous advantages of making use of Redux, but then to keep it very simple here, we've picked up the top 4 advantages of making use of Redux. One, when you talk about organized approach, right? So Redux requires code that has to be organized, and doing this will make sure that the code is consistent, the code is easy to work with, and it is structured at the same time. So to make use of this, your code has to be organized. And then when we talk about the testability or the testing ability in general, Redux functions are very isolated. They are extremely small to work with, and testing a small piece of code is very much easier, very much quicker than working with a large piece of code and then testing it later. And then when we talk about tools, developers can actually track actions and all of the tools in React by making use of Redux easily, and they do not have to put a lot of effort to do this. And then when we talk about the community aspect of things, Redux has a large community. This is an open source community, both React and Redux. So in case if you do require any help of working with Redux, or if you're stuck with any aspect of it, of course there are users out there who are ready to help you, and you can even get libraries built up in case if you do have a niche application as well. So in terms of community as well, there's a very big advantages of using Redux. Now with this, we can come to the 33rd question that states, are there any disadvantages, or what are the disadvantages of making use of the model view controller in React? One thing that we've already discussed is a lot of advantages of React in these 33 questions, but then there are certain tiny problems of making use of MVC as well. When you use model view controller, there's 3 steps: modeling, viewing, and then having the controller model all of these together will make sure that there is a slight bit of memory wastage that you have to consider. And then when you have to work with the DOM architecture, manipulating the DOM will actually take a lot of efficiency, take a lot of time as well. And doing this, the application will actually become very slow. There's a lot of dependencies that is created along with React in the case of MVC, and if you have to combine all of it together and give one big disadvantages, the model complexity will increase a lot. So for a developer, it will increase a lot in terms of workability, and for React as a framework, it will decrease its efficiency, make it very slow, and add a lot of dependencies which basically give you more probability of the application failing or something not going right. So in terms of you as a developer, there are certain disadvantages you have to consider, and then React as a framework again comes with tiny bit of disadvantages, as you can see on your screen. Now we can check out the 34th question that states, what are pure components in React? Pure components we have checked out, stateful components are done. So pure components are similar entities. They're actually singular entities, that are actually written in React. So what happens is that they are fast, they're simple to write, they have the ability to replace any other general component that you might have, and the only important thing is that it has to have a render function attached to it, because if you cannot render a new component, it is deemed useless. So to do this, you might be wondering, okay, can we use the regular component itself? So why do we require pure component at all? Well, a pure component is used only to make sure you keep the application workability high, to keep the efficiency and performance high while keeping the code same. So since these are singular entities, right, so they can be wrapped around in themselves, and they can be independently stored, independently worked on, and not have any sort of dependencies outside of the rendering ability as well. So in that particular case, when we talk about simplicity, ease of use, and how good it is for both the developer and the application, pure components wins. So after understanding pure components, we need to check out where HOCs are used. HOCs are higher order components, and we've already discussed this in a previous question. So HOCs are put to use very much whenever there's a requirement for code reusability, or let's say you have to hijack a render method, or if you have to manipulate a state and work with abstraction, and then of course if you have to manipulate properties, or if you have to work with bootstrap abstraction as well. So to be honest with you, there's a lot of applications where HOCs are put into effective use in React, but then you can mention 5 or 6 where they're the most effective and add the most value. and this of course will power up your answer as well. So manipulation of props, state manipulating, render hijacking, code reusability, and where there's a requirement where you have to work with bootstrap abstraction as well. So these are some of the very important tasks that HOCs are put in use for. Coming to the 36th question, it states, what are keys in React? So as the name itself suggests, keys are actually used to keep a track of something here. So what is that something? Well, here we'll be checking all of the items and tracking changes on these particular entities actively. So what happens is that they used to check if an item has been added or if it's been removed in a list or not. So only to check the presence or the absence of these items in the list, we use an entity called as keys. And there's a small simple syntax on your screen which shows the usage of keys in React. So again, just as with any other question that we've been talking about, if there is a situation where you can provide a very simple code snippet or a syntax snippet where you can explain your answer better, please make sure to do that for all the questions as well. So if your question can fit a quick syntax or a quick dirty piece of code, guys, please make sure to do it, as this will add a lot of value to your candidature in that particular company as well. So understanding that, we can move to the 37th question, which states, differentiate between controlled component and an uncontrolled component in React. A controlled component, as the name suggests, is actually a component in which React can do whatever it wants on it. So React has complete control of it, and there is a singular point of data for the forms where you have to perform state changes, get it re-rendered, and all of that. When we talk about uncontrolled components, here it's very important difference is that the data gets handled by the DOM and not the React component itself. So React does not have complete control over this component. And how is this done? This is done by making use of refs in React, as we already checked out, right? So if you have to implement and handle third-party DOMs, if you remember, that was point number 4, I think. Yeah, so this is where it's used. And an uncontrolled components, while being handled by a DOM and not React, has its own advantages and disadvantages. Now, coming to the 38th question, it states, how can you tell React to build in the production mode, right? So what is the simple way of you conveying to React to move to the production mode? So you can actually directly code in production mode, but then to do it, you have to set one very, very simple variable. It's called as the environment variable, and then it's process.env.node_env, and you have to set this variable to production. And one very important thing that you do have to note is that once React is put into production, right? So if there is any other developmental features that you have, or let's say if there are any warnings, all of these are not shown in the production mode. So this is something which is very important for you to mention in the interviews as well. So it's as simple as setting an environment variable. Now with this, we'll come to question number 39 that states, what is the difference between clone element and create element in React? So what is the clone element and what is the create element, right? So clone element, again, since React is highly readable, you can already tell by its name, it is used to clone an element and pass it to new properties directly. With create element is an entity where all the JavaScript XML files get converted and gets compiled and converted into a format where it is understandable by the browser, and then this is also used to create elements inside React itself. So create elements will help in the actual creation of elements in React, and of course to help in JSX files getting compiled as well. And clone elements clones the element and then passes it on directly to new props. So guys, with this we come to the 40th question that states, what is the use of the second argument that is passed on to set state? So we have something called a set state and we have a second argument that goes to it. So is this second argument optional or not? Well, the answer to it is that, whenever set state is actually finished, there is a callback function that gets invoked, and then all of the components here gets re-rendered in React to make sure that, the latest render is shown to the user. So with this, when we make use of set state, we have a second argument there. So the interviewer is trying to ask you if it's an optional argument that you pass. The answer is yes. Since set state is actually an asynchronous function, what it does is that it takes in just another callback function and works normally. So, even even though it seems very simple to directly do this, a clever programming practice, a standard good governance programming practice will always tell you to make sure to use another lifecycle method instead of directly passing it via the optional argument as well. I mean, there are multiple reasons to do this, but then they are not in the scope of this answer. So when you're asked about if it's optional or not, make sure you answer yes. And why is it optional? Because it is asynchronous, and it can handle the same thing in another callback function as well. So with this, guys, we come to question number 41. So the 41st question states, is there any way to avoid the requirement of making use of binding whenever we make use of React? The simple answer to this is yes, we can actually avoid binding when we're making use of React, and it is done in two ways. One is that you can define an event handler as an inline arrow function, the arrow function that we discussed in the previous couple of questions, and then secondly, you can make use of a function component and use it with hooks to make sure that you do not have to bind any component to each other and work with it as well. So either making use of the arrow function or by making use of hooks, you can avoid the need of binding in React. So moving on to the next question, it states, what is the strict mode component that is used in React? So whenever we talk about strict mode component, one major thing that you have to know is its advantage and why is it used. So, whenever we create any new code bases where you have to understand what components are being used there, right? The strict mode components are immensely beneficial for this. Whenever we talk about in terms of debuggability, there it will help as well, because if we can solve the problem faster whenever we wrap it with any other component, it will of course solve it quicker, because that would be the one causing the problem, and we've just wrapped it with another component and then worked with it, right? So the strict mode component is used for two things: one, in the creation of new code bases, and second, to be wrapped around other components to provide easy debuggability. So make sure that you mention these 2 points. With this, we can come to question number 43 that states, what would you do if your React application is rendering slowly? Again, this is a question which is very, very, very commonly asked, and then guys, pay attention on this one. So why do you think, rendering is slow in React, right? So the most simple answer to why rendering is slow in React can be answered in the way where, because there are so many re-rendering operations that are being done. Sometimes they're necessary, of course, if you have a very large applications, but then most of the time these re-renderings can be unnecessary and redundant. So there are two main tools that React will give you where you can check this and fix this. One is react.memo function, where you can prevent all of the unnecessary re-renderings that takes place, and whatever the function components does, you can actually find what is the rendering that is not required to be done and then remove it as well. And then you have the pure components. Of course, pure components is put into place to make sure that you remove all of the unnecessary rendering in any of the class components. So in both the ways, with respect to function components and class components, React does provide a way for users to make sure to remove redundancy in terms of re-rendering, as you can see on your screen. So make sure to mention react.memo and its usage for function components and pure components in a way where we're talking about removing redundancy with respect to class components. So with this, we move on to question number 44 that states, can you conditionally add attributes to components in React? The answer is yes, you can add attributes to React whenever there are certain conditions that are met. One thing you have to know is that React has the ability to completely omit an attribute if the value is passed to it is not true, right? I mean, logically speaking, this is supposed to be done, this is supposed to be done automatically, but then many of the programming frameworks does not do this, and React is advantageous in this way as well. It can completely omit an attribute if the value that is passed to it at the end of the day is not true at all. Now check out the simple example that's given on your screen to see how you can conditionally add attributes to components, right? So we have var condition equal to 2, var component, we have the div value is foo, and then we've easily added an attribute to the component there to further make use of it, right? So if the condition is met, then yes, you can add attributes to it, and that is shown in the example on your screen. Coming to question number 45, why is props passed to the super function in React? So when we talk about properties, again, all the properties are passed on to the super functions if and only if the user wants to make use of this dot props. So if the user has a requirement to make use of this dot props in the constructor, only then will the props get passed on to the super function. So it can be shown on the screen in the example that you're seeing right now. So when you talk about the constructor there, we're extending the React component and we have the constructor of props. So once you've made use of the constructor there, we're going to use this dot props, right? So once you have to use it, and once it is passed to the super function to have access to this dot props, we make use of the super function, guys. So coming to question number 46. Question number 46 states, what is the difference between the get initial state and the constructors in React? You have to understand that whenever we make use of ES6, right? So users have to actually manually initialize the state and the constructor, and then to do this, to manually initialize the state, we have the get initial state function. This method is actually defined by the user and worked on as well. So this is done very, very easily, as shown in the example on your screen, guys. So check it out. So we have the constructor props, you have the super function, and instead of calling this dot state, so we have manually defined the state, right? So this dot state, and we have given a comment there calling it initial state. So if you want the ability to go on to do this, you will have to use get initial states instead of direct constructors as shown here. And then when we come to question number 47, it talks about the predefined prop types that are present in React. You do not have to explain all of the prop types that are present here, the properties. In fact, you can mention them and then be good with it. So there are actually 5 very important properties, predefined property types in React as shown on your screen. One is the bool, one is the functions, the other one is the nodes. We have number and string. Of course, React.PropTypes.bool, func, node, number and string are the predefined prop types that are present in React. Again, all of these properties are used for their own niche applications, but at the end of the day, it is very important that you know this and you show the interviewer that you know that there are these predefined prop types that exist in React. So with this, we can move on to the 48th question, which states, what is React Fiber? Well, React Fiber is a new engine in React. So it is actually the re-implementation core algorithm that comes along with React 16. So one of the main important goals of React Fiber is to make sure that there are incremental rendering facilities given for the virtual DOM itself. Why is this done? Again, the primary talk here is about efficiency as well. So whenever you have to render, let's say, any gestures, animations, or anything of that sort, this will make sure that it will help in giving the right priority to what updates need to happen at what point of time. So again, this way there is no delay or there is no latency in terms of the gap that exists between multiple renders that happen for the DOM as well. So this is why React Fiber is a very important aspect of this. And then we already spoke about hooks. Coming on to what hooks actually are. So question number 49 discusses about what are hooks in React. So hooks again are entities that are used to make use of a state and any other features in one very important condition where you do not have to write a class for them. So hook is actually a new implementation. It came along with the React version 16.8, and here one very important thing is that the stateful logic can be extracted from any component very easily while testing it, while reusing it, repackaging it, and whatever you need without having to write a class specific for it. That is the advantage of hooks. And then this actually implicates that you can do all of these changes to the component hierarchy and all of these actually implicate that anything can be done here or whatever we mentioned without having to change anything in the component hierarchy as well. So there re-rendering, re-objectification, all of that is again removed, again working on efficiency, working on easy to use feature that the React framework provides for the users as well. So coming to the last question, the 50th question, we discuss about certifications. So the question states, have you earned any sort of certification to improve your learning and implementation process in React? Guys, know this. A certification program is not only a bragging right where you say that you're a certified developer, but it'll give you so many advantages in terms of career advancements where it'll show the interviewer that you're very serious about understanding React, implementing React, and working with it. And if you've picked up a certification program on your own, you're trained on it, it'll also show that you're an effective learner who has the ability to grasp new concepts and learn them effectively and master them at the same time as well. So this either you can be a beginner who's interested in React, who has absolutely no idea of how React works, or if you're a person who's switching from another framework or say a programming language like Python or something, and you want to master React. Well, of course, yes, that'll add more value to your candidature. So one important thing is that do not get lost in mentioning the certifications that you have or talking about that in detail. But then what importance is given to the answer here is to make sure what you learned from them. So the importance that you have to give here is to talk about the applications or whatever you learned from the program rather than the program itself, right? Because at the end of the day, you learned a program to implement something. Do talk about that implementation. Do talk about the projects and how it has helped you on your journey into understanding and making use of React. Be it in the learning environment, be it in an actual project use case or a production environment, a certification program will give you all the training and the structured learning that is required to make you proficient in React. And of course, it is not only that, there are multiple advantages of having certifications as well, and I'm sure you guys already know this. So with that, we come to the end of this very important top 50 interview questions for React, and I take this opportunity to wish you all the best of luck for your React interviews. I'm sure you can use this guide in a way where you understand the questions thoroughly and find ways to answer these questions in an effective way. Well guys, with that, I'll see you on the next one.